Do you guys want to know about one of the oldest European centers? Go check it out! Porto is the second largest city in Portugal, after Lisbon, and the name of Porto itself influenced by the name of the country, Portugal. The population of Porto around 237,000 and covering an area approximately 45 square kilometer is known as the capital of the north of the country. The early history of the city of Porto begins in the 1st century BC when, under Roman rule, the city played an important role on the main trade route between Lisbon and Braga. This city was established by the Celts on the mouth of the Douro River. It was occupied by the Romans during the 4th century, transforming it into an influential commercial port. At the time, the city was known as Scale, or Porto Scale, Port of Salesians, later Galatians, the origins of the name of Portugal. In the 12th century, Porto began to be part of trading route between Braga and Lisbon. Bishop de Hugo built the Porto Cathedral, the dawn of the city's growth, which emerged from within the cathedral walls and gradually spread down to Ribeira, the riverside area. In 13th centuries, dried fruit and olives and their derivative were a significant part of the commerce in Porto and Douro Valley regions and were exported to various markets all over the world. During the 13th century, Porto exported the wine that was produced in the Douro by establishing relations in international markets. And it was at the end of that century and during the next that the export of Douro wines began to gain importance. And in 14th and 15th century, John I of Portugal married Princess Philippa of Lancaster of English origin in 1397. It was this marriage that gave birth to a military alliance between England and Portugal, and the couple's son, Henry the Navigator, or Infante de Henrique, played a prominent role in the history of the country as he organized voyages to the African coast. From his seafaring expeditions, maps were created for exploring, conquering, and trading, and were the starting point for the sea passage to India. The city gradually grew in size, becoming an essential point of liaison with the Mediterranean despite the constant occupations by the French and the Spaniards. During that century, there was a huge increase in the population of the city. At that time, the settlement began to spread beyond the boundary of the walls of the Porto Cathedral to the old city wall. In the middle of that century, the new city wall began to build, which also became known as the Fernandine Wall. At the beginning of 15th century, Porto's urban environment was limited to within the Fernandine Wall, simply comprising a tight network of mostly narrow, irregular streets. In the 16th century, the city of Porto began its urban and economic growth. From 1521, on the initiative of the king D. Manuel I, the main streets of the city began to be created, such as Rua de Santa Catarina das Flores, and now called Rua das Flores. Gradually, the city became more elegant and refined. It was during the city that some of the most splendid buildings came into existence, such as Convento de Santa Clara, Convento Gil Loius, and Masjero de São Bento da Victoria. In the 17th and 18th century was responsible for dynamic architectural activity both for religious and civil purposes. The Treaty of Methuen was signed by Portugal and England, and in 1717 the first English factory was set up in Porto. As port wine production was almost entirely run by the English, the Prime Minister of Portugal at that time, the Marquess of Pombal, set up a Portuguese company to control a monopoly over these wines. In 19th century, there was instability in Porto, involving the French invasions and the Liberal Wars. In 1809, the French troops invaded the city under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte. History indicates that the locals managed to expel the French troops from Porto with the help of the English. In this century, the city of fearless warriors played an important part in the battle to defend the ideals of liberalism. Due to their immense bravery, during the 1832 to 1834 Civil War, the city resisted the siege of the Miguelista troops. The so-called Siege of Porto, which was what led to the title of Undefeated City of Porto, attributed by the Queen de Maria II. That is why the bravery and strength associated with its inhabitants is still used today as a way of defining the entire population of these regions as fearless. As from the second half of the century, the city opened new thoroughfares outside the walls that formed the city's boundary, which created new settlements, markets, and improvement in other industrial sectors. And last, in 20th century and 21st century, Porto is still renowned by its wines, not only port wines but also table wines. And Porto also won various awards. In 2010 and 2014, Porto was elected Best European Destination by the Best European Destinations online elections. Also in 2014, the European Cities and Regions of the Future 2014 and 2015 survey carried out by the Financial Times, the respected British newspaper, put Porto in third place in the list of the 10 most attractive cities in the south of Europe. And in 2014, a survey carried out by the Smart brand of cars, in partnership with the Rain Gold Institute, concluded that the people from Porto are the happiest inhabitants in Europe. So that's all from me about Historia do Porto. Obrigada!